was so depressed, and I went and got the Bible, and I turned to the book of Revelation. And if people would just get and read the Bible and read the book of Revelations, they would really turn around and straighten up. This is all we need to do, is just get the good book and read it and put it to everyday life.
Sisters, niggas, whiteys, Jews, crackers. Don't worry. If there's hell below, we're all gonna go.
Obama condones this terror. No grievance justifies these actions.
Obama highlighting the need for a global action against ISIL.
The only language understood by killers like this is the language of force.
Hello, and once again, thank you for and welcome to this episode of my video synopsis, which is a further attempt to introduce to society and our with youth in general to my unpublished 400-page typed and edited historical fictitious educational novel manuscript and other anti-gang pro-society short stories. I realize how amateurish and painful it may be to overlook my technical flaws. Hopefully my delivery and editing skills will improve as we go along. I'm convinced that if and when serious attention is given to my literary work, it will prove to be an effective and a beneficial tool in the effort to curb gang warfare and promote unity and cooperation in our minority communities. The following 15 minutes I shall attempt to present an excerpt portion of my book, which I compiled into a 28-page short story titled From Ship to Shore. It's the second chapter of the overall book manuscript, which, as I've said, is an excerpt portion in the form of a short story about two teenage African-American boys named Tuffy and Sonny Red. They live in a gang-infected ghetto neighborhood in Los Angeles, California in the 1980s during the peak period of gang proliferation and gang warfare resulting from the sudden invention and spread of crack cocaine. A time in history which I termed in my book the Decade of Shame, when our modern-day inner-city neighborhoods were invaded using a substance no less lethal than a chemical weapon, crack cocaine. Tuffy and Sonny Red are both all-star players on the same Red Rag high school football team, yet neither young superstar football player is a gang member. And neither boy was aware in the beginning of the story of their ancient African history that they share, not until the day of the biggest and most controversial high school football game ever played anywhere in the U.S. of A. To begin with, the story takes place in New Orleans in 1852. A Dutch slave ship filled with human cargo was docked in the port of New Orleans. Dozens of African slaves chained together in pairs are marched in single file down a long gangplank from the slave ship to the shore. Two peculiar-looking slaves were chained together. They stood out amongst all the others. One of these slaves was named Luba Zandi. He was a West African tribal individual from a tribe called the Akili. His hair was fire red due to a tribal custom. Starting at infancy, the male's hair was dyed red and twisted into dreadlocks in commemoration of an ancient red-haired warrior whom the ancient forefathers deified and adopted the custom of dyeing all males' hair red, never cutting it the longer and redder they could keep their hair cultivated, the more blessings they get from this red-haired war god. Chained next to the Achillean was yet another West African with an even more peculiar tribal custom, wearing only a pair of ragged trousers torn off at the knees. His thin, muscular body from the neck down was painted blue. He was a Kuzan warrior whose tribal custom being to coat their bodies with a specially cured blue chalk before certain dance ceremonies, before certain perilous hunting expeditions, and particularly before going into battle against an enemy tribe. A special ancient esoteric prayer was recited over each warrior's blue-coated body. It gives the chalk a magical power in which it protects the wearer's body like a coat of armor. Psychologically, the Kuzan warrior with his blue chalk on cannot be harmed. In preparing the slaves for the auction block, they were customarily bathed and shaved. Tui did not resist being washed nor having his head shaved. He had convinced himself that he was a prisoner of war, and as such he put into practice the teaching of his elder tribesmen to stay calm and quiet, or the opportunity to escape will escape you. Lubazani, on the other hand, resisted furiously when plantation jailers approached him with hair clippers. However, the number of plantation jailers soon overpowered Lubazani, and instead of simply cutting off his red dreadlocks, the heartless plantation jailers began beating him unmercifully. Tuidu Gadu, who had been Lubazani's best friend since childhood, seeing his friend in trouble, couldn't help but intervene, even though he knew his fate would be death. The same as for his friend. Tui decided not to let Lubazani die alone. Miraculously, Tuidu Gadu intervened, and they both were beaten unconscious and tied to a stake and bullwhipped. Immediately afterwards, Tui and Lubazani were separated. Ultimately, they were placed on separate slave plantations hundreds of miles apart to ensure that they should never be joined together again. Thus was the landing of the red and blue phenomenon. The story from that point rolls forward, portraying Tui and Luba's ordeal adjusting to a life in bondage as plantation slaves. 4 generations after the landing of these two OG patriarchs of the red and blue phenomenon, Tui Dugadu, the young warrior prince of the Kuzan, and the hot-tempered young Achillean Lubazandi, 2 youth gangs, the Crips and the Bloods, symbolized by the colors red and blue, terrorized ghetto streets and dominated schoolyards throughout Los Angeles, California, and other cities across the country. The 2 best high school football teams in Los Angeles are the Vermont Vikings and the Santa Ana Warriors. Both teams went undefeated within their respective division conferences for the past 3 years in a row. The Vikings and the Warriors totally dominate the high school athletic league's Southern California division, but because they are separate school districts, the Vikings and the Warriors have never played one another. But that don't stop football fans from wish-thinking and debating which young powerhouse team would win if and when they ever met on the football field. The debate waged on for decades. Sports gurus and other local radio sportcasters have weighed in on the wish-thinking and the debating, but because of the strong Crip blood affiliation to these 2 schools, the overwhelming presence of these 2 extremely violent rival gangs operating without immunity within the student population at Vermont and Santa Ana, the likelihood of the mighty Vikings and the fearsome Warriors football teams playing one another was 0 to never. But as the old saying goes, never say never. The United Teachers Union of Los Angeles, the UTLA, and the Los Angeles Unified School District had always called the shots when it came to certain minor internal matters within the boundaries of the LAUD's jurisdiction. Mixing and matching high school football teams to align with this or that school district was the job of the LAUSD. But then a politically powerful congressman named David Shore came to sit on the mayor's throne, and he seized control of the LAUSD and to the sweet tune of sanctioning the high school football game that so many fans of the game and sports professionals wished for and debated for years in the past. Besides having Southern California's winningest football teams and the two finest athletic departments overall, Vermont and Santa Ana high schools can also take claim for having excellent teachers and a hefty share of Southern California's brightest students. All this teacher talent and student potential can be found at Vermont High School in the heart of the Watts District of Los Angeles on the east side, and the Santa Ana High School, which is located on the west side of the 101 Harbor Freeway in what's known as Compton, LA. Just two of America's best schools confined to the worst two neighborhoods. Watts and Compton are the wildest and poorest urban jungles in all of California. These neighborhoods are beds of sharp thorns, each one plagued with dozens of individual gangs, which make for a legitimate gangster culture which society deemed as an outcast culture. But by their very nature, gang cultures are infectious. Because of their alluring power to attract new recruits, society's precious young fertile minds, which are drawn to the glamorous gangster lifestyle and the sense of belonging to outcast social groups that not only offer protection but fulfills most existing voids that most all young people experience, such as the empty feelings of helplessness in their little worlds, which are dominated by the big world of adults, overly domineering adults for the most part. At this point in time, during what's known as the Decade of Shame, several violent factions of the West Side Crips street gang are at war with several dangerous factions of the Blood Street gang. Foreign violence takes place on schoolyards. The total number of blood factions or independent sets just in LA County alone is approximately 70. But there are just as many community-based grouped organizations of social workers willing and able to soldier the anti-gang cause, even on the dangerous front line of the battlefield. And if you combine the unemployed anti-gang crusaders, there would probably be 3 times the number of community programs and social workers championing the anti-gang cause, which is in essence a civil libertarian quest, not an armed task force bent on elimination, but rather education, since there is no such thing as a total elimination of gangs. Urban jungle school teachers are especially important components to the anti-gang cause. They do what they do not for fortune and fame, but out of natural compassion and unconditional love for their jobs, working with and educating society's poor and underprivileged youth. And like their precious young students and schools themselves, teachers are confined to the front line of these urban jungle war zones. Teachers are the fearless vanguards, the true-to-life anti-gangsters whose weapons are education. America, the great eagle, is the undisputed king of the hill right now on the political economic world stage, but this superpower status is by virtue of several things other than just military might and economic power. America's most vital of institutions is its private and public school system, where budding young future leaders are systematically groomed and grown into wise young adults. Society's up-and-coming future beneficiaries of the endeavor to further America's growth and blossoming prosperity are society's youth population, who must first be properly educated and prepared for their vital future roles. Yet, with schools overcrowded with eager potential, there aren't enough teachers performing the task of cultivating and stirring these eager young minds on the right path. The universal aim of teachers and that of all garden variety schools in every culture on earth is the careful cultivation and positive growth of children. Ever since ancient times, Elder members of ancient societies assumed the role of teachers. They made raising society's youth a vital priority. Thus the old phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. Ancient elders taught their youth population all about tribal law, proper social behavior, and the importance of mastering and maintaining tribal customs and sacred religious practices. In addition, our ancient forefathers also taught the youth population of their day to respect Mother Nature and how to understand and deal with nature's complex ways. In modern-day society, parents are required to plant their children by day in either a public or a private school. The purpose being to educate and cultivate today's youth into responsible young adults and ultimately into productive, law-abiding members of family, community, and society as a whole. But today's novel societies, as it lie in the bed that it made, unfortunately is seeing its schools turn into breeding grounds for that outcast gangster culture, a violent, misguided culture that infects budding young flowers with anti-society diseases in the form of negative attitudes and behaviors. And because youngsters today exhibit these anti-society traits, they are clearly breaking some fundamental rules of society as far as society is concerned, and nature in general. Thus the war on the outcast gang culture by, most notably, law enforcement arm of society. The gangster culture at Vermont High School is openly advertised, brightly displayed with red graffiti plastered on every wall of the school, and practically every public building of the surrounding neighborhood is marked with the red rag enigma of the Blood Street Gang. The red rag bandana, red graffiti, and a red dress code that gang members proudly adhered to as a blood symbolic patriotic flag. Real hardcore blood members possess killer passions for their red rag and zero tolerance toward the Crips' patriotic blue rag. The Crips, who glorify the color blue, are the blood's most hated enemy. Therefore, no one wearing blue clothing is safe anywhere within nor near blood territory. To do so and be identified as a Crip member could easily be a death sentence back in the day. Like a red shadow, the 70s or so individual blood gangs cast their total dominance over neighborhoods and schoolyards far and wide all across Los Angeles County and beyond. In the Watts district alone, there lives a giant red shadow, a large gang of bloods called the Bounty Hunters. They blanket every street and every schoolyard within the 2 square mile section of dirty ghetto streets, Wild West saloon-like liquor stores, and a dangerous public housing project called Nicholson Garden. The only thing that has managed to grow here in and around Nicholson Gardens amounts to a lawless modern-day tombstone plastered with red graffiti. Twice as many Wild West shootouts occur on a weekly basis in Watts than the one famous Old West shootout at the OK Corral between the Earp brothers and the Clantons. Unquestionably, Vermont High is a red rag school, right along with every other institution of learning in the Watts area. From graduate school back down to the tiny elementary schoolyards, it's common to hear kids on the elementary schoolyard greet a fresh new student fresh out of preschool with such sad, revealing mindsets as, "You wearing blue, I can't play with you." On the west side of Los Angeles, the urban jungle, the Crips street gang held sway in the late 1970s and early 80s. Everywhere around you find almost every building and billboard spray painted and defaced with blue graffiti. The message to all is too all clear. The west side of town was Crips' domain. Unlike the Bloods, who were born from the merging of several independent street gangs that bled into tight-knit gang alliances that they named the Bloods. The Crips, on the other hand, are born direct products of the militant arm of the Black Panther movement of the 60s. No more so, of course, than most individual black men and women living in America's society at that time in history. But the Crips were unique in that they went from a large, tight-knit neighborhood gang of homeboys no older than 16 into a militant social group advocating community self-government and the right to bear arms.